It started on a quiet morning when Lena Harper woke to the smell of frosting she couldn't place. Ethan Cole had always told her birthdays were harmless, but today, something felt wrong. On the counter sat a cake perfect, untouched, and chillingly personalized, her name scrawled in red icing. She hadn't ordered it. She hadn't invited anyone. And when the candle flickered to life on its own, Lena realized she was no longer alone in her apartment. Something had been waiting for her. I woke up that morning feeling uneasy, though I couldn't tell why at first. The sun had barely pierced through the blinds, and yet my apartment felt different, heavier somehow. There was a faint smell in the air, a sweet, cloying scent that made my stomach twist. I sniffed, trying to figure it out. It smelled like sugar, frosting, and something else, something metallic I couldn't quite place. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it as my imagination. After all, I had lived here for years, and nothing had ever felt this strange. As I shuffled into the kitchen, still half asleep, I froze. My eyes landed on the counter and my heart jumped into my throat. There it was, a cake. A perfectly decorated cake, white frosting smooth as glass, and red letters spelling happy birthday. I took a step back, confusion washing over me. My birthday wasn't for another 3 months. I lived alone, and I hadn't ordered or baked anything. My hands shook slightly as I reached for the counter. The cake was real. I could see it, smell it, even feel the coolness of the countertop beneath my fingers. I leaned closer. The frosting gleamed unnaturally in the morning light, and the red letters looked wet, like they had been painted recently. My stomach churned at the sight of them. Something about the cake didn't feel right. I noticed a single candle in the center. It wasn't lit, but there was ash around the wick, black flecks stuck in the icing as though it had already been used. I frowned, leaning even closer. The red letters looked almost like veins running across the surface of the cake. I wanted to leave the kitchen to go back to bed and pretend I hadn't seen it, but something made me freeze. The air in the room felt thicker, almost alive, as though someone or something was standing just behind me. I spun around, my heart racing, but the apartment was empty. I tried to convince myself that I had left the window open and that the morning breeze had shifted a curtain, or that a reflection had tricked me, but my mind kept circling back to the cake. I hadn't ordered it. I didn't know anyone who could have left it here. My hands hovered above the cake box. I wanted to open it, to see if maybe it was a joke, but a deep, instinctive fear stopped me. Something inside me told me this was not meant to be touched. Still, I couldn't stop staring. That's when I saw it, my name, written in smaller letters underneath the words Happy Birthday. The handwriting was jagged, uneven, and completely unfamiliar. My stomach sank. Whoever had done this knew me. Whoever had left this cake in my apartment had to have been inside while I slept, or while I was in tea looking. I swallowed hard and stepped back. My mind raced, trying to come up with explanations, none of which made sense. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe a delivery had gone horribly wrong, and someone had accidentally left it here. But no, the cake wasn't in a box with a name label. No delivery slip. Nothing. It had been placed deliberately on my counter, in the center of my kitchen, as though it were meant to be found. I backed into the living room, trying to convince myself I wasn't imagining things. My eyes kept drifting back to the cake. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I didn't want to touch it, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. A feeling of dread settled over me, tight and suffocating. I had the eerie sensation that the cake was watching me, waiting for something. Like it had a purpose beyond its sweet, innocent appearance. The longer I stared, the more I noticed the details I hadn't seen before. The frosting wasn't just smooth, it seemed almost wet, shiny in a way that didn't make sense. The red letters had a strange shine, almost like fresh blood. I couldn't stop imagining that the candle had been lit by someone, or something, who had been standing here recently, watching me sleep. I stumbled back, my breathing quickening. The thought of sleeping again in this apartment felt impossible. My mind was spinning, torn between disbelief and terror. I wanted to run, to leave, but every instinct in me screamed that it was too late for that. Something had already entered my life, my home, and it wasn't leaving quietly. I finally tore my gaze away from the cake and scanned the room. Shadows pooled in the corners deeper than usual, and the air felt colder than it should have been for a morning in May. I stepped toward the door, needing to leave, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that I wasn't just being watched, that something had left a part of itself in this apartment, something that was patient, waiting. And as I turned back for one last glance, the candle flickered ever so slightly. The flame hadn't been lit. I knew that, but somehow it moved, just the tiniest bit, leaning toward me as if reaching out. I spent the day in a fog of unease. Every time I tried to focus on something normal, like making coffee or checking my emails, my mind kept drifting back to the cake. I didn't touch it, but I couldn't stop thinking about it, imagining what it might be hiding or what it wanted from me. I tried to convince myself it was just a prank, but my stomach twisted every time I thought about who could have done this. I had no friends who would ever enter my apartment uninvited, and the idea of a stranger sneaking in made my chest tighten with panic. The smell followed me everywhere, faint but persistent. Like the ghost of something decayed hidden beneath the sweetness of frosting. It clung to my clothes, to the sheets I had dragged out of my bed when I tried to escape the feeling of suffocation. Even my phone seemed heavy in my hand, vibrating as though it wanted to tell me something urgent I couldn't understand. That night, sleep was impossible. I tossed and turned, listening to the quiet hum of my apartment, hoping the sound of the city outside would calm me. But then I heard it, a faint, slow humming. The tune was off, warped, like a broken music box playing the melody of a birthday song. My blood ran cold. I froze in the dark, straining to locate the source, my heart hammering in my chest. The humming didn't come from anywhere familiar. It seemed to drift through the walls, echoing faintly around me. I wanted to tell myself it was my imagination, but it had rhythm, purpose. It was deliberate, slow, as though it were counting me down. I held my breath and listened, every instinct screaming that this sound was not natural. Finally, summoning courage I didn't feel, I grabbed my phone for light and crept toward the kitchen. My legs felt heavy, my chest tight, as though the air itself had grown denser, resisting my movements. The humming stopped the moment I reached the kitchen threshold, leaving an oppressive silence that made my ears ring. I could feel it, something in the shadows shifting just out of the corner of my vision. But every time I tried to look, nothing was there. The fridge hummed softly, a low vibration that made my teeth ache. I couldn't stop staring at it. Something about it drew me closer, a magnetic pull I didn't understand. My fingers trembled as I reached for the handle. When I opened the fridge, my stomach lurched. The cake box was there, just as I had left it, but the lid had shifted slightly, enough for me to see the candle inside. It was lit. I froze. I had never touched the candle, had never lit it, yet a tiny flame burned, flickering softly and casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. The wax hadn't dripped in the usual way. Instead, it had hardened into strange, sharp streaks that ran across the icing like veins. My throat tightened as I realized the candle itself didn't look like wax. It was oddly textured, almost human, pale and rigid, tapering to a blackened tip. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of the rug, my heart thundering. The candle wavered in its flicker, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw the tip twitch, like it had a life of its own. A cold sweat ran down my back, and my legs felt weak, but my fear refused to let me leave the kitchen. Something was waiting, and it wasn't done with me yet. I forced myself to back away, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The apartment seemed alive. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, stretching along the walls, pooling in corners where there had been none before. I could hear faint creaks from the ceiling, almost like footsteps pacing just above me. Though I lived alone and my building was old and quiet, I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was some elaborate prank, maybe a delivery mistake, maybe stress had made me paranoid. But as I looked back at the cake, the flame of the candle twisted, elongating unnaturally, and the shadows it cast seemed to form shapes, faces, or figures that weren't there before. I blinked, and they were gone. A wave of nausea hit me as I realized that the candle hadn't burned down. The wax was intact, the flame was real, and the candle didn't belong in any ordinary cake. I stumbled back into the living room, breathing heavily, trying to make sense of it, and that's when I heard it again. The slow off-key humming closer, this time coming from inside the apartment, circling me, echoing off the walls as though the melody itself was alive. And then, from the kitchen, I heard the sound of the cake box scraping across the fridge shelf, moving slowly toward the edge, as if something unseen was dragging it, deliberate, patient, and waiting. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the living room, clutching a blanket like it could somehow shield me from whatever was in my apartment. Every sound made me jump. The old radiator hissed and clicked, but it sounded like whispers. The wind rattled the windows, but it felt like fingers scratching against the glass. Every shadow seemed to twitch, as if alive, crawling just beyond my vision. I wanted to leave, to escape, but I couldn't bring myself to open the front door. It felt wrong, as though something would stop me if I tried. Morning came, but it brought no relief. The sunlight slanted through the blinds, but the apartment still felt dark, heavy, as if the air itself had thickened overnight. The smell of decay from the kitchen had grown stronger, though I had no idea how that was possible. I told myself it was just imagination, that I was too tired, too frightened, but the iron temp in the air made my stomach turn. I could taste it on my tongue. I forced myself to approach the fridge. The cake box sat there where I had left it, but my stomach dropped when I noticed it had changed. The frosting had cracked, peeling in places like dried old skin. The words "Happy Birthday" were no longer neat and precise. They had become jagged, uneven, almost clawed into the icing. And beneath them my name had been scratched out. A new word had appeared, jagged and uneven. Tonight. I stumbled backward, knocking into the table, my heart racing so fast it hurt. Tonight, what did it mean? My mind raced, trying to form some logical explanation, but none came. I wanted to leave, to throw the cake away, to burn it, to forget all of this, but the front door wouldn't budge. I tried the handle again, jiggled it, even pushed with my full weight, but it was as though the door had fused with the frame. My apartment was a trap. The windows offered no escape either. I tried one, my fingers scraping the frame, but it wouldn't open. The glass was solid, unyielding. like a wall had been placed where the window used to be. Panic surged through me. I was trapped, and whatever had left that cake was still here, waiting. The air felt colder now, sharper, like it could cut me if I inhaled too deeply. I wrapped myself in the blanket and crouched in the living room, trying to gather courage to do something, anything. I considered calling someone, but my phone had no signal. No calls, no messages, nothing. It was like the apartment itself had swallowed me, isolating me from the world. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time no longer made sense. The humming returned, faint at first, a warped, slow birthday tune that sent chills down my spine. It drifted through the apartment, circling me, wrapping around my mind. I covered my ears, but the sound seemed to come from inside my head as much as from the room. Finally, I forced myself to look at the kitchen. The cake box was moving, slowly, silently. It dragged itself across the counter, scraping along the surface in a deliberate, steady rhythm. My stomach dropped as I realized it wasn't moving randomly. It was coming closer to me, as though it had chosen me as its next target. I wanted to run, to scream, to throw something at it, but my legs refused to obey. I watched, paralyzed, as the lid of the box creaked open slightly. The candle was lit again, flame flickering like it had a mind of its own. I couldn't tell if the candle had burned overnight, or if it had somehow reignited itself, glowing with that strange unnatural light. I leaned closer, against my better judgment. The wax hadn't melted properly. Instead, it had hardened into long, jagged streaks, curling over the edge of the cake like veins. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Then I noticed something else, a faint movement in the corner of the room. Shadows gathered there, shifting, pooling, stretching toward me. My heart hammered so violently I thought it might burst. A sudden, sharp sound made me jump. The cake box fell from the counter, landing with a dull thud on the floor. The candle didn't go out. It stood upright, flames still burning, casting grotesque shadows that writhed across the walls. And beneath the shadows, etched into the floor in something dark and sticky, were words. I could barely read them at first, but my blood ran cold when I realized what they said. Do not sleep. I wanted to obey, but exhaustion overwhelmed me. My eyes fluttered, my body sagged, and I felt the apartment close in around me. That's when I heard it, a soft scraping behind me, slow, deliberate, as though someone or something was tracing its fingernails across the walls, moving closer, patient, waiting for me to look. And in that moment I understood. Whatever had come into my life with that cake, it wasn't finished. It had claimed this apartment, claimed this night, claimed me, and it would not let go. By now, exhaustion had settled deep into my bones, though sleep remained impossible. My apartment no longer felt like my own. Every shadow, every creak, every flicker of light seemed to carry intention. The cake sat in the middle of the room, the box open, the candle flickering softly, as if it had been waiting for me to notice it. My mind screamed at me to leave it alone, yet I was drawn to it, compelled to confront whatever was hiding behind this nightmare. I stepped closer, my bare feet cold against the floor. The air was thick, metallic with the same iron temps I had noticed before. It clung to my clothes, my skin, my hair, as though the apartment itself had absorbed it into its walls. I felt a wave of nausea and almost turned away, but something inside me pushed me forward, a desperate need to understand what was happening, to reclaim even a sliver of control. Inside the box, the cake had vanished. In its place was a pile of folded papers, damp and stained. I picked one up, hands trembling, and unfolded it. It was a photograph, my photograph, taken from inside my own apartment. I froze, stomach lurching. The image showed me asleep in bed, the morning light slanting through the blinds. My blanket was half falling off me, just like it had been the night before. I dropped the photo, but more spilled out of the box like a dark waterfall. Dozens of them, every moment of my daily life documented. Me cooking dinner, brushing my teeth, sitting at the couch staring at the television. Some of the images were from moments I didn't even remember. My heart pounded in my chest. Someone had been inside my apartment, but that was impossible, or maybe it wasn't human. I spread the photographs on the floor, desperate to find some clue, some pattern. My eyes blurred as I scanned them, until I noticed the last one. It made my stomach turn. It showed me at the table, sitting where I was now, staring at the box of papers. Behind me a shadow loomed, a figure, faceless, dark, leaning over my shoulder. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold the photograph. I dropped to my knees, gasping, trying to tell myself it was a trick of light, a projection of my own fear, but deep down I knew it wasn't. That figure existed. It was here. It had been watching me, waiting for the moment when I realized I couldn't escape. The candle flickered again, its flame elongated unnaturally, casting shadows that writhed across the walls. I felt a presence behind me, something cold, patient, circling, studying me. I wanted to scream, but my voice stuck in my throat. My chest tightened, each breath a struggle. The photographs seemed to pulse, shifting slightly when I looked away, as though they were alive, recording not just my past, but my present. I forced myself to stand, my legs trembling, and tried to leave the room, but the apartment had changed. The walls seemed to have stretched, the corners bending at impossible angles. The front door and windows were still sealed, unyielding. No matter what I did, there was no escape. Panic surged through me, hot and suffocating, as I realized I was trapped. I returned to the cake box, desperate for answers. My fingers hovered over the pile of photographs, and I hesitated. Then I picked up the newest one, the one at the very top. My blood ran cold. It was a photo of me, at this exact moment, holding the very same photograph I was looking at. And in the background, the candle appeared taller than it should have been, its flame curling toward me like a living thing. A soft sound made me freeze. Scraping the box shifted slightly, moving closer to me again. I could feel a presence behind it, something watching, waiting, patient. My skin crawled as I realized it was not just the cake, not just the photographs. The apartment itself had come alive, becoming a part of whatever horror had entered my life. I sank to the floor, trembling, trying to gather my thoughts. But the presence grew stronger. I could feel it now, cold hands brushing against my shoulders. But when I turned, there was nothing, only shadows, dark and thick, pooling in the corners, writhing as if the walls themselves were moving. I wanted to close my eyes, to block it all out, but a whisper of sound made me look again. One of the photographs had shifted. In the newest image, the faceless figure had reached out a hand toward me, and when I stared at the real room, I felt a cold touch brush my own shoulder. My heart froze as I realized it was no longer a photograph, it was real. And then I heard it, a slow, deliberate, rasping breathing right behind me, just out of reach, waiting. The walls of my apartment felt like they were closing in. Every corner, every shadow seemed to pulse with life, thick with the same metallic scent that had haunted me since the first morning. I couldn't remember how long I had been trapped here. Hours, days, time had lost meaning. The front door and windows remained sealed, impenetrable, as though the apartment had become its own cage, and I was the prey inside. The cake box sat in the middle of the room, surrounded by photographs. I could feel them shifting subtly whenever I looked away. I forced myself to kneel, trying to piece together what was happening, to understand what had invaded my life. Each photo was a moment of my existence. Some I barely remembered, some I had thought private. They weren't just records, they were warnings. Reminders that I had been watched, studied, trapped before I even noticed. I picked up the newest photograph, one trembling hand over another. My blood ran cold. It showed me sitting here, right now, staring at the box of papers. But this time, the faceless figure was behind me, its dark, shapeless head tilted slightly, as though observing my reaction. My stomach churned, a cold wave of terror curling through me. I wanted to throw the photograph away, to rip it into pieces, but my fingers felt frozen, unwilling to obey. The candle flickered again, unnaturally tall, shadows twisting and crawling across the walls like living things. The scraping sound returned, soft at first, almost playful, then deliberate, growing closer with each passing second. It was coming from the box, from the photographs, from the apartment itself. The air grew heavier, colder, as though some invisible weight pressed against my chest, making each breath a struggle. I tried to run, my legs finally finding strength I didn't know I had, but the apartment resisted. Walls stretched, corners bent, and shadows blocked every exit. I was trapped, and the presence behind me had grown stronger, colder. I could feel it now, brushing against me, circling me, patient and deliberate. My skin crawled, hair standing on end, as though thousands of tiny fingers were moving across my body. Desperation forced me to look again at the photographs. Each one seemed to change subtly whenever I glanced away. Faces blurred, shadows moved. The faceless figure became clearer, a dark silhouette with long, thin arms that seemed to reach out of the images, toward me, through me. I could feel the touch of it now, cold and clammy, pressing against my shoulders, my back, my neck. My mind screamed, but my body was paralyzed by fear. And then I noticed it. One photograph, placed on top of the rest, was different. It showed me as I was at that very moment, but something was wrong. My eyes were open, staring not at the box, but past it, at the empty air behind me. My body in the photo was tense, frozen in terror, and a shadow curled around me like smoke, reaching for my neck. I realized with a sudden, horrific clarity that the photograph wasn't just a record, it was a prophecy. It was showing what would happen next. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My mouth moved, air forced through my throat, but it emerged as a whisper, swallowed by the oppressive darkness. I tried to move, to escape, but my limbs felt heavy, alien, as though I were being forced to obey some unseen will. The apartment had become something else entirely alive, patient, waiting. The candle flickered violently, and for a brief second I saw it, the faceless figure, standing behind me in the room, its dark form towering, arms outstretched. It wasn't in the photograph this time, it was here. I could feel its presence pressing into me, cold fingers brushing the back of my neck, a weight that seemed to push my head down. Closer to the photographs, closer to the box, and then the world tilted. Time fractured. The photographs moved, sliding across the floor, spinning, swirling, or showing me in impossible positions, or showing the figure closer, closer, closer. The candle burned higher, taller, its flame stretching toward me like a tongue. I felt hands on my shoulders, gripping tightly. and a cold whisper in my ear that I couldn't understand, but that filled me with absolute certainty. This was not over. I collapsed to the floor, shaking, tears streaming down my face, unable to move. The apartment hummed with life, a low resonant vibration, as though it were breathing around me. And when I dared to look at the photographs one last time, I realized the most terrifying truth. In the latest photo, there was not one of me, but two. One was sitting where I was now. The other was standing behind me, faceless, smiling. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. And as the candle's flames stretched toward me, casting shadows that writhed like living things, I understood that I had become part of the photographs, that I was no longer merely trapped in this apartment. I was trapped in something far worse, something alive, patient, and hungry, waiting for the next birthday, waiting for the next moment when fear could be captured forever. And then everything went black, leaving only the smell of frosting and iron, the faint flicker of a candle, and the whisper of a voice that promised it would never let go.